In 2009, an archaeologist stood on a riverbank in Idaho and started digging. 3 feet down, he found spear points from 13,000 years ago, exactly what the textbooks predicted, proof of the first Americans crossing a land bridge from Asia. Then he kept digging. 6 feet down, he found a fire pit, stone tools, bone fragments from extinct Ice Age horses. And when the radiocarbon dates came back, they showed something impossible. 16,000 years old, 3,000 years before the first Americans were supposed to exist, in a place they couldn't have reached because the route was blocked by 2 miles of solid ice. Someone had been living in North America when they shouldn't have been there at all. Cooper's Ferry, western Idaho, a quiet river terrace on the banks of the Salmon River. For decades, locals and ranchers walked over this spot, occasionally picking up odd-shaped stones eroding from the mud. Nobody thought much of it. But for the indigenous Nez Perce people, this location had always been known as Nipe, an ancient village site preserved in their oral histories. For generations, archaeology treated oral traditions as myths, stories, cultural memory distorted by time. But archaeologist Lauren Davis from Oregon State University believed something different. He believed memory could reach farther back than science thought possible. In 2009, his team began systematic excavation. They started with the upper layers. As expected, they found Clovis projectile points, the distinctive fluted spear tips that have defined the first Americans for nearly a century. Radiocarbon dates confirmed these artifacts were around 13,000 years old. This matched the textbook story perfectly. Clovis people crossed the Bering Land Bridge, walked through an ice-free corridor between massive Canadian glaciers, became the first humans in America. Comfortable, settled, accepted. Then the team dug deeper. Below the Clovis layer, the familiar fluted points disappeared. The soil changed, darker, more compacted, and in that sediment they started finding something that shouldn't exist. First, a fire hearth, not a natural burn, a deliberately constructed feature, a pit dug into earth, lined with fire-cracked rocks to retain and distribute heat. Inside, charcoal. Wood burned by human hands thousands of years ago. Surrounding the hearth, dozens of stone tools, hundreds of razor-sharp flakes, the waste left behind by master craftsmen. This wasn't a temporary campsite. This was a processing station where people lived, worked, prepared food. Then came the weapons, not Clovis points. These were stemmed blades. Sharp tip on one end, carefully shaped stem on the other, designed to be attached to wooden shafts. Archaeologists call this the Western stem tradition. The team eventually recovered 189 stone artifacts from the deepest layers, including 27 complete tools, 13 stem projectiles, blades, scrapers, other implements. But the most telling detail wasn't just what they found, it was how they found it. These tools were discovered in cultural pits, deliberately excavated holes where people had cached high-quality implements, burying them for safekeeping. You don't cache valuable gear in a place you visit once, you cache it in places you know, places you trust, places you plan to return to. This indicated intimate knowledge of the landscape, repeated occupation over generations. When Davis sent charcoal samples from the hearth to laboratories for radiocarbon dating, the results shattered the timeline. The dates came back ranging between 15,000 and 16,000 years before present. This settlement was active 3,000 years before the Clovis culture even existed. This created a massive geographical impossibility. 16,000 years ago, the famous ice-free corridor through Canada didn't exist. The Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets were at maximum extent, more than a mile thick in places, creating an impenetrable wall of ice stretching from Alaska to Montana. Even if a small gap had physically opened, recent biological studies show it would have been a desolate, muddy wasteland. No plants, no animals to sustain travelers. The door was locked. If people were living in Idaho 16,000 years ago, they couldn't have walked there. They must have arrived by a completely different route. The breakthrough came when the team examined the tools themselves. The stemmed points were made from cryptocrystalline silicate, high-quality stone that fractures like glass and creates edges sharper than surgical steel. This material doesn't occur naturally at the site. It had to be sourced from specific geological deposits miles away. These people were mobile, organized, resource-savvy enough to seek out the best materials. But the real revelation was the design. These stemmed points looked almost identical to late Upper Paleolithic tools found in Hokkaido, Japan, dating to roughly 20,000 years ago. The manufacturing techniques matched perfectly. Both traditions used the same core reduction methods. Both created predetermined flake blanks. Both rejected the fluted style that would later define Clovis. The technological fingerprint was undeniable. The first Americans at Cooper's Ferry carried stonework traditions directly from northeastern Asia, and since the overland route was blocked by ice, there was only one way they could have reached Idaho: by boat. During the last glacial maximum, while Canada was buried under ice sheets more than 2 miles thick, the Pacific coastline remained open. More importantly, it was extraordinarily rich. Kelp forests stretched for thousands of miles, creating an ecosystem teeming with fish, seals, sea otters, shellfish, seabirds. For a maritime culture, which these groups clearly were, this wasn't a barrier. It was a superhighway, a kelp highway. Starting around 17,000 years ago, groups began island hopping south from Beringia, the now submerged landmass that connected Siberia and Alaska. They followed the abundance, establishing camps along the coast, then pushing farther south. The Columbia River Basin, where Cooper's Ferry sits, would have been the first major off-ramp into the interior. The Salmon River, rich with spawning fish every season, would have drawn them upstream repeatedly to this exact terrace. But they weren't just fishing. Scattered among the stone tools, the team found 86 bone fragments, not from deer or elk, tooth fragments from an extinct species of Ice Age horse known as equus. These fragments were found in direct association with stone tools and hearths in the cultural layers. The inhabitants of Cooper's Ferry were hunting and butchering megafauna that vanished at the end of the Ice Age. This is the smoking gun. In 2014, geneticist Eske Willerslev sequenced the genome of the Anzac child, an infant buried 12,600 years ago in Montana with over 100 Clovis tools and covered in red ochre. The boy became the Rosetta Stone of Native American genetics. Willerslev's analysis revealed that roughly 80% of all present-day Native Americans from Canada to Chile are direct descendants of this boy's family. The DNA showed something crucial. The Anzac child shared about 1/3 of his genome with a 24,000-year-old boy from Malta, Siberia, near Lake Baikal. The remainder came from ancestral East Asian populations. This meant groups from Siberia and East Asia met and mixed before 25,000 years ago, creating a unique founding population that became isolated in Beringia for thousands of years before expanding south. The critical link came from another ancient individual, the spirit caveman from Nevada, who died 10,700 years ago. He was found with Western STEM tradition tools, the exact same technology found at Cooper's Ferry. Genetic analysis proved he was closely related to the Anzac child, and by extension to modern Native Americans. This connects everything perfectly. The people who made the stemmed points at Cooper's Ferry 16,000 years ago were the direct ancestors of the Clovis people, who appeared 3,000 years later. Clovis didn't replace the first Americans. They evolved from them. The Western STEM tradition wasn't evidence of a separate migration. It was the technology of the founding population as they moved down the Pacific coast and pushed inland. The most remarkable thing about Cooper's Ferry isn't just one spectacular date, it's the persistence. As the team excavated deeper, they found evidence of repeated occupation spanning 3,000 years, from 16,000 to 13,000 years ago. Multiple generations returned to this exact spot, used the same river terrace, hunted the same animals, cached tools in the same pits. The law of superposition, a fundamental principle of geology, tells us the oldest material is always at the bottom in undisturbed layers. At Cooper's Ferry, the deepest cultural deposits date to roughly 16,000 years ago. Since they found fully formed hearths, sophisticated tools, and processed animal remains at that level, human activity almost certainly began even earlier. Some archaeologists involved believe the initial settlement could approach 17,000 years ago. This makes Cooper's Ferry one of the oldest confirmed human settlements in the Western Hemisphere. It provides the final nail in the coffin for the ice-free corridor theory. The first Americans didn't wait patiently for ice to melt. They didn't trudge through a narrow gap between glaciers. They were sophisticated mariners who sailed down the Pacific coast with Asian technologies, navigating river systems deep into the continent millennia before we thought possible. The story of the first Americans has fundamentally changed. It's no longer a tale of big game hunters stumbling across a land bridge into an empty continent. It's a story of exploration, ingenuity, adaptation. It's about boats navigating icy waters. About people who spotted a river delta from the ocean and decided to follow it. About a culture sophisticated enough to cache tools for future retrieval. Organized enough to return to the same camps generation after generation. Cooper's Ferry, with its hidden caches of stemmed points, its hearths that burned while ice sheets still loomed large over Canada, its fragments of extinct horses, stands as definitive proof. When these maritime pioneers reached the rivers of Idaho 16,000 years ago, they didn't just pass through. They built fires, they buried their treasures, they hunted Ice Age megafauna, and they found a place worth calling home. For generations, the Nez Perce people remembered this place, called it Nipehe, preserved it in oral histories. Science finally caught up to what they'd been saying all along. Memory reaches deeper than we thought, farther back than textbooks allowed, and sometimes the people who weren't supposed to exist turn out to be the ones who were here first. What does it mean that humans reached America thousands of years earlier than we thought? That they came by boat, not by foot? That oral histories preserved truth longer than written records? Tell me what you think this discovery changes about human history. And subscribe, because we're rewriting the story of how people reached this continent. And every dig brings us closer to the truth.